Welcome to Co-Branded, your go-to source for brand strategy, design, and business insights.
Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, we're here to help you build your brand with confidence.
Let's dive in. So another day, another podcast.
Yes.
Today we're talking about brand archetypes,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a wealth of experience with brand archetypes, much more than I do. So what are brand archetypes?
That is a very good question. I'm actually kind of curious why you don't use it.
I mean, there's no reason specifically. It's just not a tool set that I've kind of not haven't come across it, because I've obviously come across it, but it wasn't something I integrated into my workflow.
Okay.
I think as designers or as creatives or as brand strategists, we find the tools that we resonate with, and we kind of go from those. I do believe that it's a good tool, especially because it allows you to connect emotion with your brand. And I think that's a big thing for marketing and for understanding what you're trying to do and how you do it. But again, it just hasn't been a tool that I've used extensively up to this point.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Well, and it's interesting because I feel like for someone who is on the strategy side, that's important, but it's even more important for someone who is on the brand identity design side, especially since it has so much to do with the brand personality. But yeah, so brand archetypes are basically personas.
Okay.
We have 12 main personas. This came from psychology from back in the day and Jung, and figuring out how the brand can be perceived as a human being. And even though we know that brands are not necessarily live in the sense of, right, like people.
Sure.
But there has to be some emotional connection. And especially since, I think we talked about this last time, that there is, with the change of marketing and the way that everything is happening right now, it's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, people were just bombarded with, billboards and messages, and they didn't have a way to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
But now they do. And actually, that's what marketing is nowadays, right? Is creating relationships with people. So in order for people to be able to relate to a brand on an emotional level, they have to connect through personality, through values, through the way that they speak, what is important to them, right? All these things. And that's basically, we have these personas to do that. And just an example, there's a rebel, right? There's a persona of a caregiver.
So just not to cut you off, but I do want to make a distinction for the listeners, is that in this case, we're talking about a persona that maybe they've heard the term before from the marketing perspective of a persona.
Oh.
So they are two different things. Like a brand archetype persona is something that you're using to establish your brand personality, your brand emotion, and clarify that concept. And then there's also like customer personas, which is a slightly different thing, which we'll talk about in a different episode.
Yeah, definitely a totally different thing. So yeah, you're right. Personas from now on for us will be personas for market research, for, right, like making sure that we're talking to the right people.
Mm-hmm.
Archetype, we'll just call it archetype.
Sure.
And we'll just leave with that. Yeah. So archetypes basically is a personification of a brand. And I'm not going to go through all of them, all of the 12, but there is the two extremes would be a rebel and a caregiver, for example, right? And when you're thinking about a brand and establishing that archetype, you're thinking about what their values are, basically what they want to do in the world, what kind of impact they're after, right? And there are some that are about sharing knowledge. There are ones that are about inspiring, and there are ones about the status quo. They're rebellious against the status quo, right? So like, for example, Harley Davidson, that's definitely going to be a rebel. Dove is going to be a caregiver, right?
Sure.
But the thing about it is that the reason why it's so important for a brand to understand what kind of archetype they are, they have to, and also there's a mixture, right? Like usually it's not one archetype, it's a mixture of, let's say, 50% of this and 25% of this, but it's always different for every brand, and that's kind of the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Right?
And I was going to ask you about that in terms of, there are a lot of brands that walk a line of being one thing and another. People people as well as brands aren't so singular in terms of we're only the rebel. Maybe they're a rebel that cares.
Sure.
Or, all the different options that the personas give you. So I was going to ask you if that was the case, that there could be a mixture of them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's kind of what makes it beautiful and unique because, yeah, like you said, people are not as straightforward as this or that. So that's also a way for people to connect to. And that's also an opportunity for people to create brands that are unique.
Sure.
So absolutely.
Cool. That's awesome. So other than the obvious reasons, maybe obvious to us, why use them? Like once you've established who your archetypes are, why are you using those? What are those doing for either the business or the creative working on that particular brand?
That is a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wrote that one down.
Prepared.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, so the reason why it's so important is it actually is a guideline and a starting point for all the strategy as far as content wise, for example. But it also translates onto the whole brand experience.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna have a rebel, and I'm just gonna base this on these two extremes, right?
And we can also put the list of the 12 in the description of the episode too, so that way people have it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you have these two extremes, I totally forgot.
Why are we using them?
Thank you.
Yeah.
See, this is how I have a thought, and it's like it goes in my head, and there's a sequence. But if you interrupt me,
was it my fault? Did I interrupt you? I'll take that one.
And everything's gone.
We'll put that on the bad Josh list.
Yeah, seriously. Okay, so why use them? Because it translates onto content. It translates onto how the brand basically communicates and treats their customers. So you should technically see it in everything. And it's interesting because let's say a rebel, right? So sometimes it's even about how they answer the phone, what the culture is, what they're about. And I'm assuming we can all assume a rebellious brand that has it's a strong value is not going to be a stiff environment to work in, right? Because they will actually appreciate creativity and working, thinking out of the box and all these things. So ultimately, I really do think that there's a missed opportunity in not using them unless someone who creates that brand identity can very, not intentionally, but it's they have a feeling for the brand and they can kind of figure those things out. But it just makes it so much clearer. And then that's actually something that I would put in brand guidelines, right? The brand archetype, because it helps paint the picture. It helps create an idea, an understanding of a brand instead of trying to figure it out every time.
Yeah. And as you're talking about that, obviously as a brand guy myself, I'm thinking oh yeah, I could see where I could use that or why that would be valuable. Beyond the identity and the strategy of a brand, it also helps define the culture of the brand. As you were saying, like a rebel, there might be more edgy. The language that they use might be more direct or in your face, or again, not that they can't be compassionate or supportive, but it's not going to be the same thing as a purely compassionate brand where they're much more empathetic with their language or their terminology or how they speak. So yeah, I definitely see the value in those aspects of it.
Well, plus it's interesting because you said, of course, empathetic, right? But also when you have a brand that knows who they are as far as archetype or the mixture of archetypes, the causes that they're going to be involving themselves in are also going to be different. So, for example, Dove and all their campaigns towards body positivity and acceptance and confidence and all these things, that's totally on brand for them.
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, if you don't have that understanding, it's just difficult to make sure that you stay on brand and you don't dilute it.
Sure.
That it's actually consistent. And that creates stronger brands because unfortunately in today's world, we are literally bombarded with so many messages. And actually, funny enough, I was just talking to one of my clients yesterday, and people think that if they throw out a message out there, if they send it out into the world, everyone can see it. So it's almost like they want to send out 1, 2, and they're like, well, nothing's happening. Well, nothing's happening because there was this research. I think it's way more than even 8 times that someone needs to encounter a brand, like have an experience with them. I don't know, hear them, see them, for them to even register that they exist, right?
Yeah, historically it's 7, and we actually talked about this a little bit in the What is Branding episode. But yeah, historically it was 7, but with the day and age now with social media, you're, like you said, you're bombarded with other stuff. So it's even more to capture an attention. We say internally, or when we're working with clients, that you have to almost be sick of it before it'll probably work in the public.
No,
you have to say it so many times internally, or marketing's like, oh man, we're really, beating a dead horse here with this, but that's when people will start to recognize, just because they don't have the same purview of what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. No, it's yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I remember working on a campaign in an agency, and we're like, oh my God, so sick and tired. People are so sick and tired of hearing this. And it's like, nope, only you are.
Yeah.
They're not. So yeah, absolutely. But one thing I wanted to mention real quick is Wendy's.
Okay.
This is not product placement because I don't eat at Wendy's, but Wendy's, when you go on their social media, they're hilarious.
Okay.
They're so funny. They really are. Like, everything they write, everything they advertise has such a witty humor, but it's entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely a part of their brand personality of Archetype is jester, the jester. So someone who's like using humor, right, to connect with people.
Sure.
But when you think about it, when you imagine different brands of fast food, what if they only relied on their product?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's the same.
Yeah.
You could say it's the same. Maybe there's like a secret recipe or whatever, and people like this one more over the other. But ultimately, how are they going to stand out? How are they going to be different? And for me, when I'm thinking about, and again, I'm not a huge fan of fast food in general, eat your veggies. But when I think about Wendy's, I think about they're hilarious.
Yeah.
I want to connect with them.
Yeah.
I follow them, and I never eat there. I've never eaten at Wendy's, actually, but I follow them because they're hysterical.
It's okay, Wendy's. I eat there all the time, so we'll even it out a little bit. So that's really interesting. One, again, because you're connecting with the emotional aspect of a brand, not the product of a brand, and I think that's really critical for our listeners to understand, is that a brand isn't. Again, we'll probably say this in every episode, but a brand isn't a one thing, but it's all the things that you do. So to take a slight step back, you said that there were 12 different archetypes. Again, we're not going to go through each one of them, but we'll make sure that information is available. How do you go about understanding? So I guess for me, the process that I would take normally is defining the why and the brand attributes and, these different types of things. Do you do the archetypes after some of those have been established so you understand the core values, or do you do that before and then use that to actually produce the why and the core values and the attributes of a brand?
I don't know if there's necessarily like the right way to do it.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, and that can be a topic for a whole nother episode, because I've noticed that what I do and the way that I do it is a crossroads between science and intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's interesting because the moment that I send out a brand questionnaire and I get an opportunity to talk with my client and really understand what they're about, like why they're doing what they're doing, I have a pretty vivid idea in my head, vision of who they are as a brand archetype.
Sure.
I'm not going to impose that on them because that's something that they know, whether they know it or not, and it's a matter of like getting it out of them.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's just the more consolidated the brand is, right? The more vibrant it is, the more you're going to see it. So to answer your question, and not go around it, I don't know if there's necessarily the right way to do this,
Sure.
that you should use the values, and values are usually easier for brands to find for themselves rather than the archetype.
Yeah.
And then also, like, the whole brand, I would call it discovery and not necessarily strategy. Because to me, strategy is telling people what to do, like having a plan for the future. And then discovery is basically understanding what is.
Yeah.
So during the brand discovery process, you'll work with the client to establish those things. And then if you think, I think you might be a little bit of that, let's explore that, right?
Sure.
And then once it has to feel good.
Yeah.
And it has to feel good because, again, it's like, it's almost, sometimes I think about it and I really don't want to make this superficial and shallow, but a makeover. right? Like giving someone a makeover and they say, oh, I like edgy, but I don't know, like leather jackets and stuff. And it's like, okay, cool. But you're going to wear a leather jacket, but deep down inside, you're actually a caregiver, and there's going to be a dissonance, right?
Yeah.
And the dissonance is not only about the fact that people will say, hey, it looks kind of awkward in this. You're not going to feel good in it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because everyone has an outfit where they feel like $1 million, right? But it's because it fits not only their body shape, not only their height, not only color wise and pattern wise, but its personality.
Yeah.
Right. And it tells other people something about them. So if someone's wearing, sports shoes, to me, it means they're practical. They have places to go.
Okay.
Right. So it's an assumption, but there are some things that we like subconsciously even understand about a brand or people without. Yeah.
Yeah. And the way that I am hearing what you're describing is that it's authentic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, well, we need to be edgy.
Right.
Well, if you're not edgy, then don't be edgy.
Right.
And again, we're,
Right.
in terms of a person and a brand,
right.
But it's making sure, and, we'll touch on it a lot through all the different episodes, but it's the intentionality of building a brand the right way, because it's who you are as a culture and a person as a company. So that's super cool. Are there any, I don't want to be like, hey, give me 3 tips to pick your personas, but are there some key understanding pieces that a business can think about or a creative can help when they're working with a client that allows them to hit the ground running? Are there some key aspects of choosing or discovering the archetypes for a brand?
Yeah. So there is some people have quizzes, tests that they can do. How accurate they are, I wouldn't bet $100 on them, but I would bet 60.
Okay, 60%. Okay, that's not bad.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely a very good starting point. And sometimes it's interesting because you do a quiz and then you do it again sometimes later. And if something else is coming up, then, there's room for more clarity.
Sure.
But if the same thing keeps coming up, and for me, when I was doing this for my own brand, my brand archetype that kept popping up was Explorer. And the Explorer is someone who loves to be free and wants other people to be free through knowledge, through different experiences, and, just really being brave to pave your own way, right? But I wish I was a little more rebellious.
Well, again, it has to be authentic, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't know. You look pretty rebellious in that corduroy jacket. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So ultimately, quizzes would be the one thing. Okay. And then also, so Iconic Fox is the website that you should definitely start with, because it has a description of all the 12 brand archetypes and what they're after, what the brand is afraid of, right? What the brand is against also, and what they're trying to do in the world. I want to say it is, and I don't remember his first name, but the last name is Huragan, which is so interesting because in Polish it actually means like horrible storm.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
He's pretty sure he's Australian, and he's one of the, you could say fathers of brand archetypes and how they relate to brand strategy.
Okay.
He does a lot of classes on Udemy and whatnot, but yeah, I can talk about this for hours, but ultimately those will be the main things that I would do if I was a brand trying to figure it out.
Okay, cool. And then I guess to wrap it up, I think we've talked a lot about it in terms of why it's helpful, but why is this helpful? What are the practical reasons to actually have an archetype for a business? What do they gain from it, and how do they use it once they've established it?
Right. Well, so all in all, and you can go as deep as you want to or as you need to as far as a brand archetype, but most importantly, it saves so much time, because people are the worst thing that happens is when the brand is not specified, there's no clarity. And every time people have to create content or design something, they try to figure it out. And they're like, oh, do we sound like this or do we sound like that? Do we use this or do we use something else? And like, oh my gosh, that's exhausting. And it makes people want to gag when someone says brand. So there's a better way to do this. Yeah. And if you have those things established, the voice and tone, what kind of messages, also messaging, right? Like what kind of things are you even throwing out there in the world? What are you about? And then everything should literally go through the lens of that archetype, right? And again, strongly connected with personality. So saving time would be one thing. Clarity would be another thing. And then most importantly, this is a way for a brand to connect to the people on an emotional level. And again, back in the day, maybe the product was enough, right? And we have the best product and it's at the lowest price.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's take it. There's like an ocean, right? Like millions of different companies doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So that is a way to stand out, and it's a must.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that you and I talk about quite a bit, that alignment is strategy, that having an alignment across the leadership team or the whole organization or simply marketing, it makes it easier and faster and more efficient and more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
If your brand's not consistent, it's not a brand. People have different experiences every time they interact with your brand, and that's going to not create trust, not create loyalty, not going to create that connection, like you said, with social media and the Wendy's. So that way, if you go there, you might get a chuckle, or you have this expectation of what the brand is, and that's why it connects with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important to make sure that the things that you're doing, and again, archetypes are a tool in this whole big giant tool bag of establishing and curating your brand.
Right. Well, fascinating what you just said. And two thoughts. If a brand about trust,
Mm-hmm.
if a brand is if a person is reliable, then that means that we know what to expect from them because they're consistent.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. You go to Wendy's, you're going to get a chuckle because that's the expectation, because historically that's what they've always been.
Yeah.
So the moment they start diluting it, and like sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're not funny. Like, I don't know what to expect from you. So that's also the brand trust.
Yeah.
And just one last thing, an example. I actually had a call with a client yesterday, and we created hi, you know who you are. Best client ever, actually. Yeah, seriously. But no, actually, really, really, really good client to have. Anyway, the brand it doesn't even matter what it is,
Yeah.
but it's elegant, it's sophisticated, it's minimal, and the price tag is a little higher than the average thing, right? So we created packaging, we created the brand and the logo, and we have all these guidelines, and they're super elegant. And then I know a lot of people, especially like not solopreneurs, but people who are like a micro business, they try to do a lot of the things themselves. Yeah. But even so, when you're not a designer, you have all the brand guidelines, but it's very difficult for you to translate it onto anything else, be it messaging or visuals, because you're not a designer. But he basically put together his website, and he said, I have my bounce rate is like over 90%. And so people go to his homepage, and he's invested money in like Google ads and Facebook ads and whatnot, and Instagram. He said he even created a shop on TikTok, which, by the way, I am not on TikTok. So just letting everyone know. But don't try to find me. I'm not going to be there. But anyway, but the bounce rate is like way over 90%. So something obviously happens, right? And it's not that they're going through a different page. They're just like, they're sent directly to the homepage. And I looked at it and I'm like, well, I understand why. Yeah. Because the way that it's shown, right, through photography, that's the DIY solution of photography. It's not translating that you are a brand that I want to trust. Mm-hmm. So obviously, so like whenever I if someone goes to their homepage, it's like, it looks like it's unfinished. Yeah.
So the way I hear you're saying to describe it is that the brand touch points are inconsistent. So they may come from something that is very elegant, high end. And then when they land on this other marketing material, it doesn't create the same experience.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Also, the reason why it's so important for a brand to invest in brand strategy and design, and it's not a superficial solution, especially since the message that you're sending out to the people is, I care about my brand is quality, so I am willing to invest in it. Mm-hmm. And that's why you should too. Yeah. If you as the brand owner or the brand itself are not willing to invest, why would I? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So yeah, that's
So as a final thing, you kind of self-described yourself as the explorer mm-hmm. Archetype. I've done little work with archetypes. What do you think? What archetypes am I?
I think you might be a mixture of explorer and sage.
Okay. I'm going to look these up afterward and see what you think of me. But
hold on, let me think about it. Those are the two that mostly come to mind. And I know you on a personal level, but I've never worked with you, like in the sense of like, I've never been your client. You know what I mean? So that's also probably I'm assuming a different experience. But as a brand, I would say that you're probably an explorer sage, and maybe there's a little bit of something else, but
Okay.
I'll think about it and I'll send you an email.
Well, that was good. I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I hope that was helpful to everybody, and it was helpful for me. Again, I think it's a very good tool to incorporate. There's lots of tools, lots of different ways to establish a brand, but as long as it's intentional and you're doing it, with respect and intention, then I said intentional twice, but
That's okay. That means because you're very intentional, and that's why you use the word.
or I just don't have a good vocabulary.
It's okay.
Cool. Well, awesome. Well, thanks so much. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, your brand story is yours to define.
Follow us at Co-Branded for more tips and strategies. Stay curious, stay creative, and we'll catch you next time.